And
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I always forget that.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. Welcome back to 1455's author series. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. If this is your first time checking us out, welcome. We're so glad you're here. I know you're going to enjoy yourself tonight, so spread the word, and we'll see how our community will grow. If this is your first time, 1455 simply is a nonprofit. Our mission is incredibly transparent. We want to celebrate storytelling, and whenever we have a chance, we want to shine a light on storytellers. That's what tonight's all about. That's what all of our free virtual programming is all about. I'm happy, as always, to be partnering with our friends at DC's historic Potter's House. Potter's House is a nonprofit cafe, bookstore, and meeting space in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of DC. They've been around since 1960. They are a key place for larger conversation. And as we hopefully continue to come out of the pandemic, it's a place where we once again can meet, and you can go there for solidarity, conversation, and their bookstore is amazing. And we are delighted to support them and independent bookstores by making tonight's book available. So when you pick up your copies of this book, check out Potter's House, check out independent bookstores, and consider them when you buy more books in the future, and help us keep that going. Before we start, I did just want to kind of quickly acknowledge, I'm very cognizant that we are living in so-called interesting and crazy times, and being here tonight, having the freedom to be here tonight to have a wonderful conversation with a good friend and brilliant author is very much a privilege. It's one I take very seriously. It's one I'm very humbled by. But at 1455, we do want to acknowledge that there's profound suffering and chaos going on in the world, and we support the free exchange of ideas, peace and love and understanding and dialogue. So tonight, I hope this is a respite from very real, very significant world concerns. But the show must go on, but it goes on with heavy hearts and a genuine acknowledgement that people are in tough spots. So I ask, everyone to do what they can to support peace over hatred and confusion. So my special guest tonight needs no introduction, and yet it is my profound pleasure to introduce her. I'm also proud to call her a friend. I have been delighted to know Jenna Blum for 2 decades now. You'll fall in love with her tonight, as I have, and so many other people, both readers and fans and just writers and people in and outside the literary community, because she's ebullient, she's brilliant, she is the ideal literary citizen. I'll say no more because you're going to see. Writers should show, not tell. But let me read her bio, because I'm happy to do so. And for those of you that are not aware of who she is, Jenna Blum is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of the novels Those Who Save Us, The Stormchasers, which I think I have on Kindle, and The Lost Family, the novella The Lucky One, which is in the collection Grand Central, and most recently, the memoir Woodrow on the Bench. Jenna is one of Oprah's top 30 women writers, with her work published in over 20 countries. She's also the co-founder and CEO of the literary social marketing company and Miracle during this time of pandemic, A Mighty Blaze, which we'll talk more about. Jenna is based in Boston, go Red Sox, teaching at Grub Street Writers, where she's been running master fiction and novel workshops for over 20 years. Last and definitely not least, as I mentioned, she is a superlative literary citizen and a ceaseless source of inspiration for writers everywhere. Jenna, it is my extraordinary pleasure to welcome you to the 1455 author series, and thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, my brother from another mother, Sean Murphy. Yes, finally we get to hang out together after it's been a minute.
It has.
Yep, you've done
and as well it should have been, because you've had a little bit on your plate of late.
As have you. I know we've been sort of admiring each other from afar, like watching comets go across the sky, but I've watched what Sean has done, creating a community with 1455 literary arts, and I know it's such a robust and vibrant nucleus for writers and for readers and artists and creatives, and I am just in awe of this, and I know what it takes to do it from behind the scenes. it's a total joy. It's a total labor of love. And it is like an all-consuming thing, right? So if we're going to talk about Blaze, I also would love to talk about your achievements as well. I think they've sort of twinned, right?
Absolutely. Well, and you know, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. The example that you provide is always inspiring to me and your team, and the unbelievable work you've done. Which again, I'm happy. We'll get into that. Talk a little bit more in detail about what you actually are doing and why it matters. But I know you also wanted to acknowledge kind of where we're at in our world right now. So before I get into business, I want to kind of cede the spotlight and let you say a few words and introduce yourself however you wish.
Oh, thank you. Yes, lest you thought this was merely a mutual admiration society, which it is and will continue to be for this conversation, because it has to be. I think when you said, Sean, why it matters that people are good literary citizens and try to connect writers and readers and bring stories to the world, it actually is a great springboard back to what you were saying when we opened, which is that ever since we started Blaze is I'll throw this in there, wedge that in there so you know where I'm coming from with this. But A Mighty Blaze is a team of 35 creative professional volunteers dedicated to connecting writers with readers after the book tours were canceled in March 2020. So we are a company that was inadvertently founded by me and Caroline Levitt, who's an amazing novelist who's like a heart on legs, basically. And we have this incredible team of passionate people we work with. And we founded it in response to crisis. So we founded Blaze in response to COVID, and then we had to pivot every time the world threw something new at us. And anybody who's lived in the world for the last 20 years knows that we have gone through political strife, and we've gone through the George Floyd murder, and we've gone through protests, and we've gone through climate change issues. And today we have the latest situation in Ukraine. So what I spent much of my day doing, in addition to trying to keep out of the Twitter tractor beam, was put my arms around my understanding of that situation, and then talk with my team about how do you put the show on? How does the show go on when the world is in this anguish and when we're threatened by this kind of crisis? And luckily, Blaze and people like you have provided a sort of a template for why story is important in these times. I think that because all of us are so plugged into news and are so attuned to the information about other people's agony right now, it's really important to be able to pause just for an hour and acknowledge what's happening, but also say, like, let's talk about the things that connect us. Let's talk about the power of story and the power of goodwill, so that we remember that we actually have a common humanity, and also just give ourselves some breathing room. So that was what we were talking about with Blaze today, and that's what you're providing for everybody tonight. And I, for one, appreciate it.
Well, Jenna, I do too. And listen, I mean, I do think, the world moves in funny ways, right? We're talking about the importance of story. And for me personally, I find such great solace in having the opportunity to engage with a dear friend and role model and talk about the dogs we love. And I'm representing Team Schnauzer tonight, of course. But yeah, I mean, what better? And I think that really it's a metaphor for life in general. Right? One of the many reasons we love dogs is because they're always reminding us of what's important: love, loyalty, being in the moment. So, I mean, look, well, let's get right to it. I think the best way for me to open things up and to talk about this gorgeous memoir is, for those that haven't read it yet, Woodrow is what was, is, and always will be the George Clooney of dogs. Explain how he earned that moniker and why he is celebrated accordingly.
Thank you. So yes, Woodrow, hopefully we'll have that reputation forever and ever. So as much as I nickname people and give names to characters, I did not come up with that nickname for Woodrow. There's a wonderful novelist named Lisa Borders, and she saw Woodrow's robust social media presence, which he had on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and noticed how much he posted photos of himself with ladies. And she said, he was like, 5 or 6 years old. She said, that dog is like the George Clooney of dogs. Every time I see him, he's surrounded by ladies. And in fact, that was true. Like, Woodrow was not a blockhead. black lab, you had those like beloved block-hatted, like big bear black labs. He was very elegant. He was like a gentleman in a dog suit. And he was one of those labs who would cross his paws, do what we call the elegant cross paws, like, hello, welcome to Master Paws Theater. And since he was like 8 weeks old, like I remember seeing my then partner, who I got Woodrow with, outside of Starbucks. He was holding Woodrow, and I ordered coffee and looked back outside, and he had completely disappeared with the dog in a sea of women who were all like, oh, that puppy is so cute. So that went on for 15 years.
Yeah. Well, and listen, I mentioned Schnauzer, so I'm allowed to say this. I say it with some sarcasm, but also some genuine like awe of the dog hierarchy. I mean, there are dogs and then there are dogs. And I think few people would argue that labs are the platonic ideal of our furry friends in all, writ large. They are, friendly, loyal, they're gluttonous. And you mentioned early in the memoir, the first rule of lab ownership: if a lab doesn't eat, he's dying. And you talk so humorously, poignantly about Woodrow's appetites. Tell those that haven't encountered him yet how we can get to Woodrow's personality through his different appetites.
Oh gosh, what didn't he eat, right? Those of you who are lab owners know that the labs will eat anything, especially if it's inedible. So I grew up with labs. We had sort of a lab farm in New Jersey when I was growing up in suburban, like in Montclair, New Jersey. And my dogs were entirely untrained. We had 2 black labs and a yellow lab at one point, and my mom could not leave the house without seeing a dog she liked and bringing it home. So I was used to the fact that the labs would eat everything. Like our dog Gus could get a loaf of bread off the top of the refrigerator and eat it. And yet somehow in my early 30s, when I became a dog mom to this 8-week-old lab, like I knew that I had to keep certain inedibles and edibles away from him. And I was totally unprepared for, like, when he was like, before he was a year old, I bought him to a friend's house and they did not have all their dog food secured. Right. And they had it in a garbage can, a lidded garbage can, but a garbage can in their garage. And young Woodrow was running around with their dogs. And I had said before I bought him there, you have to make sure everything is locked away, because their dogs were German Shepherds. They weren't labs. And they're like, oh, okay. And on the drive home, I was like, look how fast Woodrow is growing. Like his stomach seems to be expanding so rapidly. And that night I put his bowl down on the floor with his dinner in it. He backed away and I'm like, oh, taking him to the freaking hospital. And he had eaten the whole garbage can full of kibble and had to have his stomach pumped. And that was my reintroduction to the lab appetite, which didn't cease until like literally the week before he passed. I mean, this was a dog who would get 5 carrots out of the crisper drawer at once. And we called that morning.
So the George Clooney of dogs, but at times the Keith Moon of dogs too.
Yes. Well,
so, I want to talk all about him and the book, but I also want to, because I have you in the hot seat, talk a little bit about craft. And I think, as someone that has made her name quite loudly and positively as a fiction writer, I feel like when I've talked to people that have straddled different genres, when it's time to write a memoir or they come to write a memoir, there's a particular moment when they realize the material could be, should be, has to be a memoir. And having the benefit of seeing the finished product, my first reaction is, of course, this is a memoir. But I'm curious, at what point did you know I'm going to write about Woodrow? And of course it has to be a memoir, or was it a process, or did you know, like, how did you come to write the book?
Yeah, thank you. I love craft questions. As you know, we could just dish craft all night. I'd be totally happy. I love talking to other writers about writing. So I knew Woodrow was going to be a memoir, or as I said, a memoir, because I feel like there's something so like zsa about writing a memoir. It's like you're writing about yourself. It seems so self-important and self-involved. And I never wanted to write a memoir. And I do read memoir, and I read it for the same reason I read fiction, which is to find out what life feels like in somebody else's skin. Yeah. But I look to the memoir writers for another reason, which is for life lessons. And I feel as though each memoir author holds up a torch on a difficult road that they have somehow transversed and is then saying to the reader, this is how I got through. And that is precisely the reason I never wanted to write a memoir, because as many interesting situations as I had survived in my life, I didn't feel that I had what it took to put my arms around those situations in a helpful way until Woodrow. And I knew in the last 7 months of his life, which is what the memoir focuses on, when we were sitting on the bench across the street from my downtown Boston apartment, because that was as far as he could go, when I was watching him age rapidly in those 7 months and yet give back so much to the community and teach me all these lessons too, I thought, okay, I do have a memoir because I have not yet seen this addressed in any memoir, those last months of your pet's life and how vulnerable making they are, how precious they are, how difficult they are, how bittersweet they are, and how amazing. And also the way he interacted with people and brought them all to the bench. So I thought, it's really extraordinary. I'm going to write about it. So I spent some of that time on the bench actually contemplating how would I structure it and how could I pay homage to this extraordinary dog who had kept me company for 15 years and 7 months.
Well, so I want to say a couple of things of approbation, which is that you being a masterful storyteller, of course, you were able to bring this picture to life and make everyone rightly fall in love with this good boy. But I think what a on a craft level and for those of you kind of checking in and wondering, how is this done or why is it effective? I think a good memoir that really tries to tackle the theme, it lives within that contradiction of being at once very introspective, completely putting the spotlight on oneself, and yet completely offering insights that are universal. And I think one of the things you do so brilliantly in this memoir, Jenna, is you tell the story of a dog's life. You certainly tell the story, which is full of genuine pathos and something that anyone that's been on that journey can relate to, and you present that. But you're also allowing the reader to see who you are and also what we all share as it relates to grief, preparing for grief, and how to live with that. So I do want to kind of acknowledge that it's a wonderful book. You achieve the goal. You want to celebrate Woodrow, but you in your first memoir, in my opinion, you nailed it in terms of operating on a lot of different levels.
Thank you. I love what you said about the inherent contradiction of memoir being that it turns the spotlight both inward and then expands it outward to an entire audience. I think that's totally true. And people often ask me, what is the most difficult thing about pivoting from fiction to memoir? And I mostly found the process much easier because I didn't have to invent the story. For me, inventing the story in fiction is the hardest part. And I know many fiction writers think like, what is actually happening with this plot? Like that takes a lot of refining and throwing spaghetti at the wall and then more refining. For a memoir, it's like, I just lived this. And so I simply need to put it in its container and tell it as honestly and entertainingly as possible. But what was really difficult was putting the spotlight on myself, because when you're a fiction writer, you're hiding yourself. You're hiding your hand. If you can see the writer at work, the writer is doing a bad job. And with memoir, you have to be like, look, it's my underpants. Like, really, it's like, and the more you show off, the more the reader feels connected to you. And that creates the universality to me to reveal the vulnerabilities that I talk about in the book. That was a very ticklish and a little squeamish feeling, but ultimately I found it liberating. And I think writing the memoir made me a more honest person.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm not surprised. I would imagine this is pure speculation, but I think being vulnerable on the page and being honest, there's at least two wonderful things that come out of that. I think it comes from confidence to be able to do that. But I think there's a quote from David Foster Wallace, although I'm sure many people have talked about this, but often with writing, it's the stuff that we think is our darkest or most perverse or most embarrassing that ultimately connects, because we're articulating probably what so many people either also are feeling they're alone in avoiding or being afraid to talk about. Certainly not implying that everyone, has their own obsessions and idiosyncrasies, but I think that the successful and confident writer is able to uncover some of these universal dreads and phobias, and that vulnerability initiates a dialogue. And I think that's another thing we could get into in terms of craft. Like, what do you mean by dialogue? It's a book, but a good writer a good memoir writer is able to be in dialogue with the reader because there's a certain intelligence at work, knowing that you're writing about yourself, but you also know you're going to be read by someone, and you don't have the kind of shield that you mentioned, the artifice to insulate. It's very raw.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point. And I would love to tell an anecdote, if I may, about
Great.
sort of telling a story on yourself and the things that you find the most difficult to write. So in summer of 2020, I had the great privilege of interviewing Cheryl Strayed for A Mighty Blaze, for one of our Frontliner Fridays, which is when we interview the authors with the largest track records. And I asked her about that pivot from fiction to memoir, because of course she is well known for writing memoir, but I came to her as out of love of her fiction, out of her book Torch. And I asked her, what was the experience like of writing a memoir, and what was the experience then like getting that feedback from your audience about you, like not about a character, about you. And she said that she got the most feedback about writing about swallowing a handful of her mother's ashes. Like when she was scattering her mother's ashes from her hands, she impulsively like put some in her mouth and swallowed it. And she said, when I was writing that anecdote, I thought, oh, I can't put this in the book. Like, I think this is probably too much. And she said, I do get letters from readers saying that was too much. Like, you really lost me at this place. She said, however, 90% of my reader mail and 90% of the feedback about it is, I thought I was so alone. I thought I was the only person who ever did something like that. I'm so grateful to you for writing about that very thing. And she said, it gave me the courage to know that when you put yourself out there, you may get feedback from people telling you like, this is horrifying, but most of the people are going to be grateful for that wire to wire connection between human beings.
I love that. And, I have a undeveloped theory that I'm curious what your take on this is, because I have a feeling that you'll agree. I think most readers would agree. For me as a reader, whenever you're reading, and I think this is true of memoir and fiction, because I think there's this cross current of whenever it's obvious that the writer wants you to identify the heroic, noble nature of what's being written, the less you can trust them and the more forced and phony it seems, which isn't to say the opposite's true. Like, the more vulnerable, the more real. But that's what I mean when I say confidence. I mean confidence on a craft, on a writing level, but the confidence of saying, I understand how this works by being vulnerable. It's the same way we are when we have a couple of glasses of wine and talk with friends. It's a very similar process of letting guards down. And what is the motivation? Are you trying to connect honestly? And I think that's why books like this resonate so powerfully with an audience. Thank
you. I don't know. I mean, when I was writing this section, there's a chapter in Woodrow called July. Every month, every chapter in Woodrow on the Bench is dedicated to another month that Woodrow survived after getting a diagnosis from his cardiologist, because of course he had a cardiologist, of congestive heart failure. And that happened in May 2019. Is that right? Yes, May 2019, and he lived to December 2019. And yes, that's right, December 29th. Sorry, bad with dates. So each month is a chapter, and each chapter is dedicated to a different lesson that he taught me. And the most disclosive chapter, I feel, is called July, You Are Not Invisible. And that was about, why I found myself for 7 months sitting in downtown Boston alone on a park bench with my dog, with nobody to help me carry him in and out of my apartment building, 16 steps. The dog weighed 85 pounds. For a while, he couldn't walk because he was really compromised. And I had to rely on the kindness of friends and neighbors, because I'm not married and I don't have kids, who could have, grumbled at me, but helped me. And then my neighbors went away for the summer. And then I thought, I am just really effed. Like, I'm really effed. And I had a lot of time on the bench to contemplate, how did I get in this place in my life where I had nobody to help me? Like, how did I end up on this bench without a family, as I had sort of intended to have and then didn't, and like what led me here? And so that was the chapter in which I feel like I am like exposing the most emotional underwear. And that is the chapter that people say, they've read pieces back to me at readings and gatherings. But when I was writing it, Sean, oh my God, I think at that point it felt a little bit like I was running a tightrope across an abyss and thinking, I just have to tell the truth. Like that is my job in this moment, sitting in my chair and typing and trying to pull out what it felt like to be in those moments and how alone and ashamed and stupid I felt for having gotten in this situation and trying to unravel why I was there. I just have to tell the truth about that. And then you cast that out upon the waters and you can only hope people are kind. Like that's it. And that there may be a chance people are like, damn girl, you're pathetic. Like what is wrong with you? But then you think, well, those are just not very kind people. And there's nothing I can do about that. I can only hope people are kind, but I told the truth. That's the important thing.
Indeed, and again, I mean, I'm positive throughout Mighty Blaze and certainly through this series, there's so many themes that emerge and reemerge for all the right reasons. But honesty, is certainly one of the recurring themes in terms of how do you hope to engage, or what is your goal? And I mean, there's so many goals. You want to be read, you want to be understood, you want to be successful, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, on the craft level, if you've rendered the material in as honest a way, both aesthetically and personally, as you're capable, there's a certain satisfaction in that I think when you get the kind of responses that you've always gotten to your writing, which is so easy to understand having read you, that's why people are responding. And aside from the brilliance of the writing, which I want to make sure that is acknowledged as well. But that honesty serves a purpose. It serves a purpose for the art.
See, this is why we come to the well of 1455 to talk to Sean. Like we were talking about like writing and the purpose of writing and the honesty in writing. Like I love talking about this stuff with you. We could talk about this all night and I would be happy to. I think it's an interesting exercise as a fiction writer because you're writing very honestly, usually about some emotional thing that you've then plugged into a fictional context. And you have to hope that that communicates somehow. But yes, this is a very different, I think of fiction as being like a wire with a coating on it. It's an insulative coating and it insulates the writer, not the reader. But that wire connects the writer and the reader through like the charge of the writing. But this is again sort of a bare wire on bare wire connection, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, well, and I think accordingly, that reaction you'll get is more intense because of that lack of a safety net. So you led me. And this is proof of our, of our thing.
Our kindred thing.
And
yeah.
I want to sardonically acknowledge I'm in a new place, so my printer's not working because, of course, I'm a writer. I have no technological. So we are going so old school tonight. These are my usually typewritten, typed out and printed. I've got my old school handwritten notes. But you led me right to my next question, which I do want to talk to you a bit about because it's I think a through line in the book. And I mean, this is like such fodder for me because we talk at 1455 about community with a capital C and all that entails. But I love how you really interrogate through Woodrow. He built or he facilitated this community that, of course, cared for him and cared about him. And then as they saw what was happening, they, of course, continued to care and empathize, but they started to care for you. And I would love you to talk a little bit about, what you learned about community of strangers, friends, acquaintances, and also about yourself through that process.
Yeah, beautifully put. Thank you. So Woodrow, as I said, was a big dog. And after he had this congestive heart failure diagnosis that led me to buy him many expensive medications with really explosively gastronomic side effects. There is a chapter in the book that is dedicated to the poop explosion. That's all I'm going to say about that. But anybody who has ever taken care of an animal at the end of its life or a person at the end of that person's life knows that it's a very particular kind of caretaking, and you have to be, physically on point. It's physically difficult. It's messy. It's stinky. It's, you're not getting sleep, like you're not caring for yourself. It's a time that requires you to be selfless and think about that person or creature's experience of last days and what you want that passage to be like for them. So this is what I was going through with Woodrow. And although my former fiance, Jim, was with me through portions of Woodrow's last 7 months, mostly it was just me on my own. And when I say on my own, that's totally a misnomer, because as Sean pointed out, every day I took Woodrow across the street to his bench, morning and night, in downtown Boston, which means I had to get him out of an apartment building, down all these steps of our very old, beautiful 1860s building, across Commonwealth Avenue, which is basically like the Speedway 500, with Boston drivers who are just like, yeah, get the fuck out of the way. No, sorry, I don't know. Sorry, FCC, that's me, not 1455. But yeah, they will try to kill you if you put your foot off the curb. So I would take Woodrow across the street and they would stop for him. Like, that was my first indication that the dog had an amazing power to create community. And then he would do his sniffs and we would go to the bench and he would wump down next to this park bench in the dirt and hold court there. And at first, I was not surprised that our dog mom and dad neighbors came and sat with us, but I was surprised by the amount of time they spent sitting with us, because every morning and night, in every weather, rain, sun, snow, sleet, in Boston, all in one day, you know, in like 1 hour, when people would come, they would bring me coffee, they would bring Woodrow bacon, they would bring us food, they would bring us stories from their own lives. So like their kids getting married or like putting their parents in assisted living. My friend Jacqueline told me about her dating life, which was like wildly entertaining, like The Bachelorette. And they all came and sat with us with their dogs. And then, as I mentioned, they went away for the summer, as Bostonians do. They escaped to the Cape, the islands, Berkshires. And then just when I was feeling most sorry for myself, Woodrow started to draw in strangers with his George Clooney-ness. And he would reel in with his sort of canine tractor beam elegance, people who had come to Boston for the 4th of July, and like a pair of farmers who had never been to the city before, but were visiting for their 55th wedding anniversary, which they then spent on the bench with my dog, with the gentleman reading his lady a love poem, you know, reading it to me and to Woodrow and Woodrow's dog sitter, and also coincidentally to his wife of 55 years. And this beautiful Italian woman who sat down in the dirt with my dog in her white jeans and cried and said, "He has such a special soul. This one, I can just tell, he is so special," until her boyfriend finally pulled her away and she was apologizing. I mean, this was the kind of thing that happened all the time. And I just sat and marveled at it. And one day in December, when Woodrow was having a really hard time standing up because it was almost his time, I was having a hard time lifting him. And a woman appeared out of the snow in a parka. It was snowing really hard, and she was wearing a parka and a hat, and I couldn't really see anything except her eyes. And she said, "Do you need some help with your dog?" And I said, "I don't." And then I said, "Yeah, I do," because that was one of the lessons Woodrow taught me, was how to ask for and accept help. And she said, "Okay, and I know about all dogs, I'll help you." And she helped me stand him up, and I was just like carrying him back across the street on his harness, and I turned around to thank her belatedly, and she was gone. And there wasn't even a footprint in the snow. So this was the kind of community that Woodrow drew around him like a nucleus. And it taught me that I could, in fact, throw myself on the world and it would hold me up, that I could not even ask strangers for help, that people would step forward to help sometimes if they saw you struggling, and that they would continue to do that after, you know, your beloved pet was gone. He died right before the pandemic, and the lessons he taught me about asking for help stood me in very good stead.
Wow. Thank you for that, Jenna. And, you know, I want to say, you know, so when I've been promoting this or talking to people in and outside of 1455, anyone that's a dog person is like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna weep." And it's like, I can appreciate, I want to somehow address the people that are not dog people, and the people who are like, "Oh God, you guys are such saps." What we're getting at, and what Jenna does in this book, is articulate, this is not just, look, sentimental love. Okay, what's wrong with that? Like, that's enough. But we're talking about why dogs make us better. And you said an anecdote earlier. I'm going to give you a brief anecdote, but I hope this will allow you to talk a little bit more about your understanding of dogs. So Leroy Brown, who was my first schnauzer, who had started the whole, I call him the dog father, because I have so many friends that got schnauzers because of him. But when I moved into an apartment complex in 1999, he was a puppy, he was 2 pounds, but I had already noticed, I'd lived in this complex for like 6 months. And I was a bachelor at the time, but I mean, I had noticed and articulated, there's like 1,000 people that live in this complex. We get our mail and we avoid each other, and we can't talk. And I appreciated that. Well, I'm a man, so I appreciate if a woman, but there was just this standoffness. And I had commented to friends how it just kind of bums me out that like, this is where we are as a society. Like, and I get it, but it bums me out. I got Leroy, and within 3 weeks, I was the mayor of that complex because I knew everybody. And that was a real example, however sentimental or cliched that sounds, there's real data there that all of a sudden this little cute dog opened up not just my opportunity to be a good human, all these people who had their guards up, again, for a variety of good reasons. I knew everything about them. And so to me, that's one of many examples we could use of the magic of dogs and what they do to make us better people. But the whole book articulates how Woodrow does this, and you've already spoken to it, but I'm curious if, on behalf of us dog people, I'm happy to be called a sap, but, talk a little bit about why we are the way we are, and why someone like you would want to write a book, not just talking about your beloved dog, but talking about this powerful bond that does good things for humanity.
Yeah, that's, again, of course, and not surprisingly, beautifully put. There is a passage in that July chapter where I'm describing about when I first got divorced. I was living in Boston. I was 29, which is a terrible time to get divorced because everybody's getting married. That's the little wormhole of summers where every weekend for about 4 summers you're going to weddings, and I decided to get divorced, and I was like the last person left standing in a game of musical chairs, and I was kind of looking around going like, what happened to my life? Actually, I have no idea. And I was writing then, and it was summer, and I wasn't teaching, so I was about as isolated as a person could be, and I did not have a dog. And Boston was a pretty new city to me then because I had just moved for grad school, and so I didn't really have a big base community. And I didn't know how to make friends. Like, I didn't know how to talk to people, like when you're a little kid and your parents take you to a birthday party and they're like, go make friends. And then they drink wine. Like, I was never very good at that. And as an adult, I didn't have any conversational currency. So I would go to bookstores and lurk around and like hope somebody would talk to me about books. Or I'd be like, okay, I'm in a Meg Ryan movie. Can I like knock over some avocados and meet my love of my life, or, anything. And then I found myself like going to Whole Foods at like 11:30 at night on a Saturday, like desperately like wanting to be among other people. And it was just so hard to vault over that gulf initially between me and another person. And how we connect is sometimes really mysterious. And so when I found myself alone on the bench with Woodrow when he was 15, I had this terrible flashback emotionally to that summer when I first got divorced. And I thought, I'm going to be invisible again, just like I was then. Yeah. And I had not counted on having my dog, and having a dog makes you not just a person on a bench. I could have been sitting alone on a park bench, and any of us who lived in cities know that like a person sitting alone on a park bench is just a person sitting on a park bench. You might or might not sit down and be like, nice day. But that would be rare. Like, most of us are on our phones, or we're, reading a book or trying really hard not to talk to that other person. But when you have a dog, it is a great conversational icebreaker. And what Woodrow did was not only draw people in, so they'd be like, hey, nice dog, or your dog's beautiful, can I pet your dog? Because he was old and he couldn't move, but he was obviously so happy to see people, like smiling with his 4 teeth and like wagging his tail and like, showing his George Clooney gray and whatever. I mean, people would stop and sit with us because they really wanted to give him some love, but he couldn't get up to greet them. And so they would sit and spend time with us and tell us about their old dogs, or talk about their old parents, or talk about somebody they'd loved and lost, and tell us stories about their lives. And so it was like Humans of New York, except it was like humans of Boston and everywhere else who love dogs, but also life. And yeah. I found it so extraordinary that in 2019, when people were so polarized and were so happy on social media to call each other the most awful freaking names, an old dog could be a lightning rod that drew people from literally every corner of this country and every place in the world. And there was never an uncivil word. And the common denominator was goodwill, which is, I think, an especially powerful message to remember tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, beautifully put, and full agreement. And I guess I want to belabor the point a teeny bit and say, while my previous comment was certainly meant to articulate, this profound appreciation for the glory of dogs, I think what's also in there, and what I'm hoping to illustrate, is that this impulse to connect and put aside petty differences is in all of us. So the fact that dogs are one way of facilitating that dialogue has always, for me, and so I guess maybe the reason I want to belabor this is because my point is it's a very human loving. We can and should talk about our love for dogs all day long, but it's that, for me, having had a dog in my life for the last several decades has reaffirmed my belief in humans, because when those barriers are removed, as you just said, Jenna, it allows us to get to the important things, which is everyone wants to see what we have in common. We have so much in common. People want to support each other. I think generally people want to be nice and generous. And again, I will say praise to you for bearing witness and being just a wonderful mother to your beloved friend, but showing that this is what comes out of love. We get it. We have an enriched life experience by sharing that.
Yes, it was extraordinary. And that was really the second reason that I wanted to write the memoir, was not about Woodrow's dotage. It was about the fact that all of these people came and showered their love upon him. And I mean, every day you can still go to Woodrow's Instagram page, which is Woodrow on the Bench. And if you scroll all the way back to the beginning, you'll see the people we encountered on the bench. That's why I started the Instagram on his behalf. There would be like, there's one lady who came and sat with us, who was a Muslim in a hijab. Not so unusual in downtown Boston, unusual in other places we lived and traveled. And she came to us during the Muslim ban, I think, and was sitting with us. And we were talking about that. And she said, she looked at Woodrow and she said, love is love is love is love. And we all really need a little bit more of that right now. And I thought, God damn, I have to put this on Instagram. My first thought, but my thought is I really need to share this with people. It's extraordinary. And every day I would hear something like that and people just really want to connect. They just really want to connect.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, I mean, again, I think if I were to say, aside from the obvious low hanging fruit, what's this book about? An amazing dog, love of a dog, dealing, with the process of seeing a dog through that process, community, love is love. It's as much a book about humans and yourself as it is about Woodrow. Another thing that you do, Jenna, that I want to acknowledge and high five. I do think it's a little bit different because it's a dog as opposed to a family situation. But another theme that I've talked to a lot of people about as it relates to memoir is the notion of trauma and when is it the right time? How do you process the grief and when is the writing possible? And the general consensus, which I share, seems to be you have to heal to a certain extent so that the art, or for lack of a less pretentious word, the writing can flow without being therapy on the page. I just want to acknowledge and celebrate that you didn't need to wait a long time. And that to me is a testament to your ability as a writer and your uncanny empathy as a human that, you didn't need to take 5 years to process. And I think part of that, as you articulate in the book, and I think a lot of us dog owners can relate to, is we pre-grieve. We know what's happening with a dog. We know generally they're probably not going to outlive us. But I just want to, so I want to talk about that. But I just want to high five you for, you didn't need that time, but that's I think rare.
Thank you. I don't know if it might be rare with memoir. It might not be rare with memoir. It's certainly rare for me with fiction. It takes me like 5 years between books. And I think it's partly because I know what I'm writing about, and it's usually an emotional situation. But like many fiction writers, you have to get enough of a distance away from that emotional genesis to be able to put it into a fictional basket in a way that makes sense and that you have perspective on, like, you know what the lesson is and you know how you want to disguise it with story. But with the memoir, it was easy because I'm like, I know what I want to write about. It's about, you know, my old dog in the community that he built and the lessons that he taught me. So that was a no-brainer. And I wrote it in like a month, the first draft, and revised it in a few more months and then sent it off. It's also a slender volume, unlike, you know, my fiction, which is 400-ish pages per book. Like this one is 120 pages. So yes, exactly. And I can't believe you have the hardcover of my first book, which is like friends edition, because that's who bought it, basically.
Hard copy with the description. So
my God, you could sell that on eBay for like $7, like $7.50 even, maybe. Like, you never know, right? So amazing. Wait, what were we talking about before I
what weren't we talking about? No,
we were talking about
the notion of, you know, distance between the material and, you know, I guess I would just say, you know, I think what you're saying is probably so helpful and inspiring for writers, but I guess I would caution people, you know, be careful, because in the hands of a less experienced writer, you can never fall back on, but this is how it happened. And anyone that's been through a writer's workshop can appreciate that line of defense very early in college goes away. But hiding behind the fact that, no, this is precisely how it happened. Even with memoir, there is a skill involved. So that really gets into the onion of why I'm trying to truly celebrate, you know, your brilliance, Jenna. Yes, of course, it makes sense that you lived this and you're a writer, so you knew without needing years of processing what you were going to do. But I think, you know, we'd be doing you a disservice to not acknowledge instinctively you were able to understand this is what works, this is what doesn't work, this is how things flow. So I think a common challenge that more novice writers have is not understanding, like, but I'm writing it how it happened. It's like, you've got to read books like this to understand how it's done.
Thank you. Well, I mean, this one was a gift to me, I have to say. And again, like, if I had been writing a memoir that were as long as my novels, I think it would have been much more difficult. And this one, most writers, I think, have trouble with structure, whether they're aspiring, novice, newly published. You know, I still have trouble with structure. I've been writing since I was 4 years old. So, you know, it's the thing that is the most, just how to get the story up and running and keep it spinning, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, to do the Elmore Leonard thing and leave out the boring parts, you know, like that's a really hard thing to do. And with fiction, you have to kind of find your way in. And with memoir, you might have more sculptable clay to work with. But this one, again, was so easy for me because, first of all, I loved and knew the subject. And second of all, I thought 7 months, like 7 months of time on the bench, each one a chapter, like each one a lesson. I mean, it really just sort of fell into my lap that way. And I was very lucky with the structure of this. I will say that I teach a writing workshop for Grub Street Writers that I have taught for 20 years. And people don't generally say this in class anymore because I've drummed it out of them. But one of my favorite things is when people are like, but this is the way it happened, when they're trying to justify something after we've discussed what's not working as well as it could be. And I love when they say this, because then I get to do my Fran Drescher impression and be like, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If it really happened, it doesn't matter. And nobody ever uses that again. Because it doesn't matter. It matters if it works on the page, you know, it really doesn't matter. And in memoir, same thing. Like, the difference is that you're sieving out the things that happened that were not interesting or are not organic to the through line of that particular retelling.
Yeah. And listen, look, lest she and I sound like, you know, the grumpy, I won't even say grandparent, the grumpy veteran writers on our rocking chairs. The one thing that you do not need an MFA to understand this. You need not have been in a workshop, but trust me, one thing that a writer learns in a workshop is, as painful as it can be to be critiqued in real time by real people in a room, you have the advantage of being able to engage in dialogue, and you come out of it usually feeling better. What a writer learns is you never have that opportunity. It's on the page. So you need to write understanding that you're never going to be able to explain, no, this is what I meant though. And then the reader goes, oh, I totally get it. You need to get through so that it is absolutely understandable and that there are no alibis accepted. You can't say, but this is really how it happened. And especially that gets back, I think, to the whole, notion of honesty, that's not alone going to save, aesthetically a piece of fiction or nonfiction. But if it's coming from a place that has genuine intention, it's probably got a better chance of connecting, because someone's not going to be worrying about what is this person trying to say.
Right. Emotion is very connective, I find. And when I'm responding to other people's work, and I work with incredibly talented novelists all the time, and very lucky, very, very lucky, it usually is the places where the emotion shines through the work that are the passages that I can remember and quote back to them verbatim. And I've had readers quote lines back to me from my own work, which is a great humbling honor. And it usually is the places where there was that emotional wire showing, or what I call the grace notes, when you're like working away and you've been working and working on something, and it's adequate on a craft level, but not necessarily inspired, and you just got to get the character across the room or from point A to point M or whatever. And then a line comes to you from like nowhere, like a star falling on you, and you think that is such an incredible line, and you pop it into the book, and those are the lines that readers quote back to me. They have nothing to do with me, really. Like, I'm just the channel, and those are my moments of grace, which is just so great. But yes, I often say also to my people when they're like, but, like after you come out of the box, when you're, not able to respond to your work, sometimes if you're like me, you come out swinging and wanting to justify your authorial, decisions. And what I say to people, which is so true, is you're not going to be standing next to your book in the reader's house explaining to the reader what we're saying might be a little bit too opaque. Like, you're never going to get that chance to stand next to your book in somebody's head and say, but I really meant this. So it has to be clear. And wouldn't you rather have me say that than an agent or an editor or a reader on Amazon who's like, I didn't understand why the farmer did this, blah, blah, blah. Like, we will.
That's right. That's right. And I think that gets into, the craft of, for any writer listening tonight, anything you can do to preempt all of these problems, that's part of the process. When you're satisfied with a piece, that's good, but preemptively eliminating the possibility of confusion or misinterpretation that's the writer's responsibility.
Totally.
So I'm not going to say we're running out of time, but I am delighted and I am insistent on making sure we have a full stop. I want you to talk a little bit about A Mighty Blaze. I actually want to zip it. I want to say A Mighty Blaze. How did it happen? What have you been doing? Because Jenna, you and Carolyn and what you've done is it's so inspiring. It's so positive, and it's such a summation of everything we've talked about. It certainly talks about community. And we haven't even really gotten into, and maybe we'll have time, about what does it mean to be a good literary citizen. But you, in my not so humble opinion, are the consummate literary citizen by actions as well as words. So just talk a little bit about your labor of love there.
Well, likewise. And I think Woodrow taught me about community, as I said, just in time. Like, he taught me that I am a community builder. He was a community builder, that I will accept the gift of community as it comes into my life, and taught me how to ask for help and how to accept help when it comes. And that was really good timing, because he passed like 2-3 months before the pandemic. And the Blaze came about when the world was shutting down in March 2020. And I was sitting in my apartment, like everybody else, watching all of my events be canceled. I was on a paperback tour then for my third book. So I wasn't in as vulnerable a position as writers who were publishing like that week, especially the debut authors. But I had friends who were publishing in March of 2020 and April and May 2020. And I knew that they also were watching their tour events wink out, wink out, wink out, wink out, like the train board at Grand Central Station, you know how like the train time slot down and down, like we just watched everything go out.
Right.
And I was talking to a friend of mine then, Stephen Kiernan, who's a novelist, whose book Universe of Two was coming out in May 2020. And Stephen and I were like super good friends, really good book. And we had planned his tour. Like we had like gamed out his tour. He was going to get a new suit. Like we were going to have an event together where we pretended to disagree and we'd like slap each other and then like make up, you know, we had this whole thing all worked out. And then I knew that his tour was going to be extinguished. And we were talking on the phone and I said to him, I feel like, because we both write about World War II in our fiction, I said, I feel like Churchill saying the lights are going out all over Europe and they won't be lit again in our lifetime. And then I said, but you know, all of the books in publishing come out on Tuesdays. If they're traditionally published, I have no idea why, nobody has ever known, but all the books drop on Tuesdays, all the new books. I said, maybe if we put all the books together in one place, each of those books is a little light and we can put them together and make a mighty blaze and draw the readers to this one place where they can learn about the new books being published, because readers will need to know like what is, you know, they need to know where to get books and what's being published. Like they can't go to bookstores anymore, but they need stuff to read during the pandemic, and the writers will have a place to debut the books. Then I knew that Caroline Levitt was running something she called the Nothing is Canceled blog tour, and she was inviting writers whose tours were canceled to come on her blog, her video blog, and post videos of themselves introducing their books and saying a few words to their readers and getting some traction that way. And I called her and I said, do you want to join up forces? Because I want to put all the books on social media. You already have this clout. Like, let's put everything together. And that is my definition of community. Let's put everything together, make it bigger, make it better, work together to be stronger. And she said, yes, I would totally do that. And Caroline is a book reviewer. She knows everybody in the industry. Everybody loves her. So within 1 week of me vomiting up a Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram page for Blaze, we were like the only lifeboat rowing away from the Titanic. And every author publishing in 2020 was like, please help me. Like, please get me some focus for the Blip. Please put me on the Blaze. And we did, and we do. And every Tuesday we have pub day. You have to be published traditionally, but you don't have to pay. You don't have to have your publisher do it. You don't have to have your editor do it. Come to the Blaze, which is amightyblaze.com. Fill out the 4 authors page. If you're publishing, we will feature your book on your pub day. And we also graduated to being now like kind of like a little TV network. We have author interviews on our Facebook and Twitter and YouTube pages every day of the week, except Sundays. So we have Pub Day Tuesdays, we interview people who are pubbing. We have Authors Love Bookstores Wednesdays, where we feature independent bookstores and their favorite authors. We have Poets in Conversation on Thursdays. We have debut authors. We have Friday Frontliners with the huge name authors. We have a baking show on Saturday. Like this Saturday, we're making toffee bars with Brandy Susan Myers. So we do cookbook authors on those days. And we have Crime Time with Hank Flippy Ryan, who's like a 37 Emmy winning investigative journalist. So the Blaze has grown beyond my imagining. And 2 years in, we are, thank God, going strong, thanks to this tremendous team of people who like literally volunteered, like step forward to help. And it has been such a great lesson in like really angels on my shoulder all the time. Like if I'm like, wow, I need a new Twitter director. My Twitter director is going back into a grad school program. Somebody will step forward and say, I really like Twitter. Can I help you? I mean, it is extraordinary. It's amazing.
Well, look, thank you for that. And listen, say the URL again so people can go find you.
Yes, it's just www.amightyblaze.com. But find us also on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and Goodreads. Like we're everywhere right now where we can connect with people, because that's our job, to connect.
So, you know, it's my great joy, Jenna, to be able to, you know, in my own very modest and humble way, shine a light on the unbelievable work you and your team are doing. And I think it's important to underscore that I think it's partly a nonprofit thing. It's partly a veteran, whatever other epithet, like writers that have been writing for a long time. There's no competition here. You know, the people that I found that are happiest and how we define literary citizenship is putting, you know, the spotlight on other people, because it gets you out of your own head. As we started the conversation talking about what's going on in the world, that's always there. And we need to be engaged. We need to be cognizant. We need to be involved in any way we can be. But being aligned with people that are just trying to lift us up, to me, 1455 is not in competition with anyone. If there's any opportunity that we can showcase a writer dash storyteller, it's time well spent. And, you know, marshaling our forces to lift up writers and do that, you know, in a collaborative way is wonderful. But anyone that's watching this tonight that is inclined towards cynicism, I think the world wants us to be cynical and apathetic. But I hope what you're taking from tonight, aside from the fact that Jenna and I love each other, but it's more than that, because I adore and worship her as a writer. So this is not an equal, this is me hero worshiping. But the fact that the two of us are really invested in paying it forward and wanting to celebrate the fact that there are people out there every day trying to write stories in an honest way. Don't be cynical. Get involved, support, purchase books from independent booksellers, and get involved. You know, don't let the world silence you.
I could not say anything better. And I feel so much better now, don't you?
I do.
Like, I really do. And I hope everybody watching, like, I hope if you have had a rough day, as so many people in the world have had, like, I hope that you know that you're not being a worse world citizen by taking a break to affirm a sort of a shared mission of joy and community and lifting each other up.
So, Jenna, look, here, the bottom line is I am so grateful that you took time out of your your legit busy schedule to be here. So thank you. Thank you for writing this wonderful book, which is so amazing. And all the books you've written. Thank you for being a role model for all of us in terms of being, and I had so many notes, and this is a sign of a good conversation. We didn't even get to all my notes, but to me, what do I mean when I say ideal literary citizen? Someone that gets the work done in the Philip Roth sense, but someone that is a purely benevolent and ceaseless advocate for writers. That is a very rare combination. I'm in awe of it. I'm inspired by it. And I just want to tell you that I love you, and I'm so grateful that you give us something to aspire toward.
Oh my God, likewise, brother. Likewise. Like, this is the best night ever. I just been to the Oscars. I'm like, you like me, you really like me. Like, such a good night. Thank you.
We really like you. So folks, you will see Jenna again through 1455, because that's just how we do it. But for tonight, this is what it's all about. WOODROW on the Bench. Here's the best recommendation. If you're a dog person, what are you waiting for? If you're not a dog person, all the more reason, because you're going to understand why those of us that are dog people are the way we are. But it's also a beautiful book. She's a beautiful person. Jenna, to be continued, but thank you so much. And folks, once again, A Mighty Blaze, check it out, support the work that they do, because they are doing some serious heavy lifting in the service of a literary community that has not had the best of times during a pandemic, but boy, we're working toward making things better. Jenna, last words?
Just to say thank you. Just to say thank you to everybody who is watching and who took time away from their day today and their evening tonight to join us and support other writers. Sean is so right. A rising tide lifts all boats. Like, there's no competition. And that was the other theme that I started with Blaze, is I was maybe going to call it a rising tide, because I think that's really true. Like, we can all lift each other up. And you have certainly lifted me up tonight, brother. Thank you. I just love you. That was like, this is not even like an event tonight. Like, I just get to go hang out and talk to my friend about writing and ish. And it's just going to be so great. And dogs and love. And, I have so much admiration for you. Like what you have for me, it goes back to you 100-fold.
Well, so to be continued, and thank you for that. But yeah, I think for tonight, to be continued. But yeah, just Jenna, thank you on behalf of all of your fans for just you're that person. So it's a real honor for 1455 to have you part of this. And I'm certain that we've converted some folks to being Jenna superfans, which is what this is all about. So we'll deal with you soon. And folks, be safe, be well. We'll see you soon. And spread the word. Mighty Blaze, 1455. We're here and we want to include you in our conversation. So we'll see you soon. Be safe.
Thank you, everyone.